Hello and welcome to the Sunday service for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Pensacola. I'm Reverend Alice Silty, and it's my pleasure and honor to serve this congregation whose mission is to celebrate diversity, strive for justice, and inspire love. When we gather in our sanctuary, we represent an area along the Florida Panhandle and the Alabama Gulf Coast. Today, however, we are so pleased that people can join us from anywhere, and we are glad that you are here. We begin our service with the lighting of the chalice and music for centering from Denise D'Angelo. As we kindle this flame, may it spark in each of us connection and commitment to this living tradition and to each other. The Promises We Make by Reverend Gretchen Haley. It starts here, in this moment, in this breath you feel rising in your chest, the beat building between us, the healing, the hunger, the hope, the courage, the calling, the commitment, the drawing out of a new day. It begins now in the imagination, in this story we weave together, this song we sing, this prayer we bring into being from our hearts to our lips, from our hands to our life. It starts here with praise and thanksgiving, forgiveness, and this humble, centering confession that we could be wrong. This promise that we make to keep learning, to keep trying, to keep our sense of humor, to keep close this knowing that we are all in this together. Come, let us begin. Come, let us worship together. Please join me in the words to our church covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace to seek the truth in love and to help one another. Each Sunday, I remind us that we share joys and sorrows with one another through the lighting of candles. Mostly now, those joys and sorrows are shared personally through phone calls or emails, and I'm always very appreciative of people who choose to call me when they have a joy or a sorrow that they'd like to talk about. As always, there are joys and sorrows that remain in our hearts yet unspoken, and one of these candles glows for those. Each of us is created a precious and holy vessel of embodied love. We have been through a harrowing time since last March that has shattered our sense of wholeness, body, mind, and spirit, like a glass vessel fractured into pieces. Let us enter into a season of recovery as we focus on the universal embrace of love that holds us all. Beach glass begins as something whole and yet discarded. As it is tumbled by the sea, it is broken and polished until it becomes a treasured mineral gem. We do not embrace that suffering is necessary or God-given, but that suffering is a part of life. When pain comes and brokenness enters our lives, we gather in the resources for strength, friends and loved ones, a community that reminds us of the treasure that we all are, worthy of new life in the midst of hopelessness. In a year when pandemic has wreaked havoc on our world, we begin by affirming our journey to health and wholeness. Last week, in our live Zoom service, we talked about kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing cracks in pottery by filling them with gold or other precious materials. Mary Lee pointed out in her story that sometimes we are a little broken. And when we are young, it helps to have a colorful Band-Aid or perhaps a cast that our friends can write or draw on. It helps with the healing, makes us feel a little better. It's liberating us from the pain. At the bread communion, I break bread and say, bread, like life, must be broken to be whole. And each year, those words have a deeper meaning for me as more and more loss and brokenness enters my life. So here we are at the week when around the world, Christians and Jews remember two stories of loss and sacrifice leading to renewal or liberation. Even though these stories are part of our history as Unitarian Universalists, we don't typically adhere to the traditional rituals of the Jewish Passover or the Holy Week of our Christian heritage. I remember, though, that during an Easter season following the death of my husband and my mother in that year, I was hit by a very deep and kind of inexplicable sadness that seemed to come out of the blue. Not that I hadn't been sad all along, but this was something different. And I remember telling my friend, the liberal Baptist minister, that I was feeling really sad. And he looked at me and said, "Oh yeah, Easter." And the way he said it made me think. It hadn't occurred to me that a season could cause this heaviness in my heart. Until then, I'd spent much more time working on the earth-centered connection to the timing of Christmas or the solstice, but very little on Easter. Christmas and the winter solstice mark the beginning of the end of winter, which always makes me happy. I didn't even learn about seasons until I moved to Alabama when I was 16. Neither Southern California nor Barranquilla, Colombia, where I had lived before, had winter. And since we always had a flower communion for Easter at my Unitarian Universalist church in San Diego, I could easily embrace the beauty of the earth in spring without a story of suffering or sacrifice to get there. Flowers being liberated from the iron-cold grasp of winter was about as deep as my theology of Easter went. Earth awakening from winter's bond and pain, we would sing. Once I started to ponder the question of Easter season, I started noticing how often I would hear TV preachers say to their flock, "You can't go straight to Easter without going through Good Friday." My first real experience of this Holy Week story was up close and personal, walking along the Via Dolorosa in the Old City of Jerusalem. This was a study trip that I took with an interfaith clergy group from Huntsville. When my friend said, "Oh yes, Easter," I thought about that walk. He was on that trip as well. The people walking the path were tracing the steps of Jesus leading to the place of his death. Somehow, it seems we have to find our way through and out of the suffering to get to the place where we are able to rebuild, renew, or feel that liberation. This, to me, is one of the universal truths of the human experience, or the human condition, and therefore, it is the source of many myths or stories. This Sunday, this Palm Sunday, is the Sunday commemorating Jesus' ride into the city of Jerusalem in anticipation of the Passover. The people I saw walking the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows, were making a commitment to remember the sacrifice and suffering as Jesus carried his cross to the crucifixion. We have been in the iron-cold grasp of a pandemic. If we are lucky, and the vaccines work against the variants, and people actually take them, before long, we may awake from the pandemic's bond and pain. We are hopeful of finding renewed life. And yet, we will never be exactly the same. We have been awakened to much that is not okay with us. We have witnessed much that is broken. If we were not convinced before, there is no way we can ignore the injustice around us. One of our commitments must be to not forget what we have learned and to revisit our commitment to the principles of our Unitarian Universalist faith. Not only have we learned more about the world around us, I'm guessing we have also learned a lot about ourselves in this time. Nancy Hagman and I were talking about the commitments we have all made over the last year. When I suggested the idea of talking on a Sunday about how we rise, her thoughts turned to the image of the phoenix, a symbol found in cultures and religions across the world. The phoenix is a bird that rises from the ashes of its predecessor. Like other mythology, it taps into that human condition, the experience of renewal after loss or death. As I began to think about making commitments, I realized that there is definitely a privilege in being able to even make commitments or promises about what we would do during this time. For many, there have been no choices. The task was simply to do whatever could be done to try and survive the health risks, economic hardship, loss of loved ones and friends, the many circumstances beyond control. Perhaps for those of us with the privilege to make commitments that we choose to make, one must be to do our part to challenge the inequities we so clearly now see. So what have we learned about what we value as we reflect on the commitments we've made? We made commitments that were not easy to keep, and yet they were connected to the values that endure, regardless of circumstances. We made commitments to each other, to ourselves, to loved ones, to our church community, to the larger society in which we live. Most obviously, we committed to staying home as much as possible, to wearing masks, to keeping our distance from one another. We did this to protect ourselves and also others, because this coronavirus can be an undetected killer. The logistics of this were not always easy. Sometimes we had to learn new ways of doing things, like shopping and ordering things online or attending meetings on Zoom. Sometimes we had to commit to our own humility in asking for help, to use the technology, or to have things brought to us. When we committed to staying home as much as possible, we sacrificed travel, being with friends and family. Many people have not seen their children or grandchildren for a year. As we are now beginning to get vaccinated, many are anticipating joyful reunions with precious people in their lives. There have been sacrifices to our health, as many of us have avoided regular checkups and tests or visits to the dentist. For some, the fear of going to the doctor, even when a health event was in progress, actually cost them their life. Perhaps regularly scheduled health checks and vaccines for children have also been postponed. And then there are the parents and grandparents who combined working at home with overseeing and helping the children with virtual school. This commitment fell disproportionately to women who then struggled to maintain jobs, sometimes reducing hours and pay, sometimes simply unable to do both. For those without certain additional resources offered by public schools, the burden is increasingly difficult, exponentially difficult. Whatever your circumstances, privileged above others as you see it, or not. The commitments and sacrifices have been a hardship simply because we had to adapt to so much change and go without things that brought us comfort. How will we rise? We will rise in some ways because of all that we have witnessed and learned during this experience. Perhaps you have learned more about what is really important to you. Many of us have discovered we can connect in more ways than we realized. We can visit face to face with family and friends across the country without leaving our homes. We may rise from a renewed passion to use what we've learned that contributes to a healthier people and a more sustainable planet. Maybe we've learned we can live without some things we thought we absolutely had to have, and that we absolutely have to have some things we previously took for granted. What do we know? We can be incredibly resourceful, creative, resilient when it comes to our survival, our callings, or simply our fondest desires. We will rise and we will be different. This week, let's consider the steps from where we have been to where we want to be. As Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen reminds us, unless there is a Good Friday in your life, there can be no Easter Sunday.
Guiding hands and hearts and spirits into praise
As we listen to some music now, I offer you the information for how to donate to the church, either by text to give or writing a check. As always, your gifts are much appreciated. Thank you. In closing, I share these words from the Reverend David Blanchard. Do more than simply keep the promises you made in your vow. Do something more. Keep promising. As time passes, keep promising new things, deeper things, vaster things, yet unimagined things. Promises that will be needed to fill the expanse of time and of love. Keep promising. Go in peace.